Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 97. We're getting closer to triple digits. And today I'm going to talk about the Lost Caverns of Ixalan before the set is released. So we're going to speculate a bit and maybe prepare you for your first drafts tomorrow. We're going to talk about the synergies, the mechanics, and how do I feel those mechanics might turn out and what I think are going to be essential cards for those mechanics. And we're going to look a bit about at some minor build arounds. I don't think that this set has as exciting build arounds as I had for the last one, but it has some decent ones. So we're going to talk about them and try to figure out how you can build around those. There's going to be one bigger segment about one particular build around. So that's only speculation of how it should look like. But before we move into that, I would like to thank my patrons who, are a growing bunch. And thank mtgazone.com for sponsoring me. For the patrons, I have Kambu, one new patron, so thank you for joining. And yeah, I highly encourage you to help me support me because this podcast is time consuming and any motivation is decent for me. And of course, mtgazone.com. I restarted my writing of the articles, so you can read my latest one on removal in LCI. I will try to put the link in the description so you can get the double primer. I'm not going to talk about removal in this episode because of the article. You can read all about it, and clicking on those articles also is helping me. Also, something that I never asked for, but it would be nice if you like my podcast to drop me a review, an honest one. You don't have to worry. I can't read them because I'm in the UK and most of my listeners are in the US, and I only see the reviews from UK. So I don't even know how many stars I get. That's fine. Just write something. It's usually good for the podcast to get some reviews and people interacting with them. Right. With that out of the way, let's move to the preamble. I actually don't need those headphones. Let's move to the preamble. And today is be wary when set designers play with traditional color roles. And what inspired me to write it this time is the article I wrote for mtgazone.com about removal. Because while writing it, I did notice one particular thing, and that is that unlike in all the other sets in the last couple of years, where either red or black were the kings of the removal, in this set, it's actually white that is the king of the removal. Now, why should you be worried about it? Because normally colors are balanced for certain weaknesses that they naturally have. And one of those weaknesses for non-black and non-red colors is that those colors have a weaker removal. If they do have a stronger removal, all of a sudden those balances have to be rebalanced. And I'm not sure that the designers did it in this particular set. It looks to me like white has both good removal and also good cards, good creatures, good spells, which makes me quite convinced that white is going to be, at least in the beginning of the format, one of the strongest colors, if not the strongest. You have a lot of unconditional removal. You have more unconditional removal in white than you have in black, which is very atypical. You have some good rate removal, like the Dusk Rose Reliquary that you can see on the screen. We have the laser. 1 mana, remove anything. It leaves an artifact body on the board. Yes, it can be destroyed, but it also can be tapped for some value, as we will see later in the seminar. There is several cards that can use a tappable do-nothing thing, a piece of cardboard on the board. It has ward 2, which means that it's hard to be destroyed. But apart from that, you have Petrify, which is probably one of the better pacifisms that we had in recent years. 2 mana for an arrest, which means that at least it removes the activated abilities. It will still not stop certain things that trigger on ETB. There will be still a creature on the board that can be used for some other things like crewing. But it is a decent pacifism, and there is no reason to believe why it shouldn't be good. There is the Saw Blades, which is an excellent instant spell that you can kill anything that is tapped. Also, which you can bounce into your hand and replay it, and which you can craft and make a pretty sizable and nasty-looking threat out of it. And there's plenty of other spells in white that can be a good removal. At the same time, black and red are always balanced for having good removal, which means that creatures will be weaker. And we had it for many sets in a row already that black creatures were poorer, but black was still a good color because even though the creatures were poorer, the removal was pretty good. And because removal was pretty good, it compensated for the lack of good creatures. Now, in this set, there are definitely some decent black creatures, but there's also a bunch of clunkers. And without as good a removal suite as normally black has access to, I'm not sure if that's not going to cause black to be a poorer color. So it's going to be an interesting experiment, and it's going to be interesting to see what is going to end up in the set. I see in the chat Bucky Curls says that craft and sacrifice are reason that aura-based removal would not be that good. That's true to some extent, but imagine playing that removal on the Bartolomé del Presidio that this sacrifice deck will have on board. They cannot activate the ability anymore, and that becomes just a redundant use of cardboard that is probably quite big. And if you, especially some decks are going to be based on traditional magic. I'm talking specifically about dinosaurs, where things like Petrify are going to be excellent because they basically switch off their big threats. They're 6/6, they're 7/7 dinosaurs, and they cannot do much about that. Oh yeah, and Mike has a good point that aura removal doesn't hurt craft that much, but because if you killed the thing without exiling it, they would still be able to craft using that if that's the thing that they can craft into. So yeah, it's a nuisance that they can use the thing that you removed, but it's not a disqualifying thing. I'm on the wrong. Working from two windows is hard. Okay, this is my main slide, and it's awful. I know it, but it's awful on purpose. And this maps the Wild of Eldraine mechanics. Wow, I'm great. It maps the Lost Caverns of Ixalan mechanics. Reuse your slides, but make sure to change everything. I went through it twice, and I never saw that it was Wilds of Eldraine. Lost Caverns of Ixalan mechanics. And first, we have Discover, which is a sort of set apart from anything else. Doesn't have that much of synergy. Thank you, Dominic. There are 3 intertwined mechanics. The tapping 2 permanents, artifacts, and crafting are sort of intertwined. Then there is a big patch of mechanics that are very well, at least in my opinion, linked. That is Descent, Descended, Caves, Self-Mill, and Explore/Map. Then there is More Power, which is completely not linked to anything else, not supported, and doesn't have any payoffs, which is interesting to see how white-green is going to work using that. And then there is a Dino Tribal, because for some reason, out of the multiple how is it called now? Types. Out of the multiple types and kindreds or whatever of Ixalan, dinosaurs were the ones that are supported. Kindred. Okay, I should have said Dino Kindred, and that's a bigger mistake than Wilds of Eldraine in the title. Dino Kindred is the only one that is properly supported as an archetype, so we're going to see how that one works. So this map is not put so because I'm bad at arranging things. It is put so because of certain. The closer the things are to each other, the more they probably play well together with each other. Although that's not completely true because Self-Mill will work with craft to some extent. First mechanic, Discover. This is a mechanic that is basically straightforward. It's naturally good. Cards that have Discover are having extra value. They are very often 2-for-1s, even though sometimes that second part might be weaker than you would hope so, given the number that you discover. This means also that probably the lower the number on Discover, the better the card is, because you don't pay the premium for discovering 5, but you're still going to probably on average get this 2 and 3 drop as your hits. It's going to be a bit swingy because sometimes you will discover amazing things and sometimes you will discover something that you cannot even cast, but that's the nature of it. It's still going to be great. There's few direct synergies. There is a couple of cards that make you discover twice when you would do it, but that's basically the only thing. How will cards play will depend on individual card power. So you have to evaluate them all separately. As an example, we have the Caparocti Sunborn. That's 2 red-white for a 4/4 creature That's already pretty good. Human Soldier. Whenever it attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. Great. It's a card that I think is going to lead to some atrocious game play patterns. I could see that with Caparocti, any kind of white trick is going to become slightly better because opponent is going to be forced to block it. If it comes to the situation when this thing can attack, they will be forced to block it, frequently double block it, having removal or a trick to make sure that it survives one more turn while discovering at the same time is going to be a back-breaking game pattern. But they will have to block it. So you are in a good position when you build a deck around Caparocti to include cards that will help it attack and help it connect. So Discover is mainly a red mechanic. There's 4 colorless things that can discover. There are 5 lands, obviously the caves that you can sacrifice to discover. But apart from that, it's 8 red spells, 2 blue spells, 1 black spell, 1 green spell, no white spells, weirdly, given that Caparocti is a white-red. But there are 2 white-red spells, Caparocti and the Planeswalker and Quintorius that can discover. So doesn't really have any identity apart from red likes to do it. Cards that I want to showcase. Etali's Favor, that's a 3-mana aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and trample, but also it has Discover 3 when it enters the battlefield. The interesting pattern of that one is that you can chain several of those if you have multiple in your deck, when Etali Favors into Etali Favor, into Etali Favor, into Etali Favor, if you are lucky. But even chaining 2 of them is an amazing piece of value. And I think that this card can be actually pretty decent, given the fact that there is not so much instant speed removal, and if you manage to play it, that's pretty good. Geological Appraiser, 2 red for a 3/2 when it ETBs Discover 3. Just a really, really good creature. You will put it in any single red deck that you're going to play, and you're going to be happy about it. And I wanted to show Buried Treasure because that card is a bit of a weird one. It's a 2-mana artifact treasure. It has the treasure ability, so you can sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color. But also you can pay 5 and exile it from your graveyard and discover 5. Activate it only as a sorcery. This, for me, is a card that is going to be an interesting addition to any kind of self-mill deck. We're going to talk about it later. But this is the card that you don't want to draw because 2-mana treasure is not something you should be interested in. But a 5-mana Discover 5 from your graveyard without drawing a card when you milled it into your graveyard might be good. And also in some decks, sometimes you might be actually willing to play that treasure part because you're going to be playing a multicolor deck, and sometimes that additional one-time fixing is going to be something good. In a way, it reminds me of the Jack-o'-lantern from Midnight Hunt, where that card was opposite. You get some value up front, and then from the graveyard, you can use it as a fixing. This one is reversed. You can get it as a fixing thing, but what you really hope for is milling it and getting the value from the graveyard later in the game. Now, another mechanic, tap for value. And usually it will say tapping 2, but some cards have 3, some cards have 5. These will be usually at higher rarity and they will be pretty busted, so you shouldn't worry about the details. Most of the time it's also sorcery speed. If it was instant speed, I think that mechanic would be just way, way too strong. When you can keep your blockers up and at the end of the turn just tap everything to gain some effect, it would be too good. Sorcery speed on it gives you an interesting play patterns, and still the mechanic from what I got from early access and from other streamers that had early access and from my pre-release, it's still pretty strong. And one card I wanted to showcase here is Adaptive Gem Guard, because that card looks like it's pretty weak. 4 mana, 3/3. But you can tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on it, activate only as a sorcery. This looks pretty clunky, but this thing can go to 8/8, 9/9 relatively rapidly and without actually you losing that much board presence by tapping things, because you will have 1/1 gnomes lying around, you will have equipment, you will have artifacts left over from the spell artifacts that are pretty common in this set, and without actually risking too much, you can make it into quite a big threat that people have to deal with, and it can outgrow removal relatively rapidly. So if you build the right board state when you drop Adaptive Gem Guard, it becomes an instant #1 priority to be removed from the board. And any common that can become a #1 priority to be killed is something that you might want to look into it. Obviously, it will not be great in every kind of deck, but some cards will work very well with it. Tinkered Toads, for example, being a prime example, because it creates 3 pieces of cardboard already. So if you play Toads into Adaptive Gem Guard, you can make it a 5/5 relatively easy if you can afford tapping everything that you have. But supposedly you will have some other treasures or maps lying around that you can tap for it, make it into a free 4/4/5/5 next turn when it can attack. And those tapping cards, there's 5 of them in white, 2 of them in red, and one in white-red. We saw the Caparocti in the previous discovery slide. So all of those are focusing around Boros. Right, so here are the payoffs for this selection of payoffs that I selected myself. There are more of those, but I thought about those 3. #1, Guardian of the Great Door. It's a 2-mana 4/4, but as an additional cost to cast it, you have to tap 4 untapped artifacts, creatures, and/or lands you control. So in worst case scenario, it's going to be a 6-mana 4/4. That's not something that you're going to be interested in playing. Best case scenario for it is actually going to be in blue-white, and that's turn 3. I did it in my pre-release. It's not that difficult. You just need to have the 1-mana flyer that makes a map, and then any 2-drop, and you can play this on turn 3, which is a great piece of value. But I guess in the white-red deck, it's going to be quite normal to play it on turn 4, because you either play 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop this, or, I don't know, 2-drop Toads this. It's going to be relatively trivial to play it. And 4/4 flyer is a big body. There are equipment, there are things that put counters on creatures. All of those are going to be great with the Guardian of the Great Door. Second, we have Sunshot Militia. This card is not for you, people that listen to early content, and I'm guessing not only mine, but also others. But for people that are just going to take and play the set, probably this is going to be surprising that this card can be good, but I think it is actually pretty good. I've seen some disgusting things being done with it in the early access. Ham was making a deck that was just pinging for every single turn if he wanted to, without much cost to his board presence. Making treasures, making gnomes, making everything will give you that additional reach in your aggressive deck that normally will be completely stumped by some big blocker. And having Militia is removing that problem. You can just ping your opponent to death while still risking as much as putting a mediocre 2-drop in your deck. Another card that I picked is Gold Fury Strider. That's a 5-mana 3/5 with Trample. Tap 2 untapped artifacts and/or creatures you control. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. I don't think this card is particularly great, but this is a sort of replacement for the Sunshot Militia. You can cast it next turn when the attacks, before the attacks, please remember it's a sorcery. Before you move into attacks, you can make it into, I don't know, 11/5 Trampler. That will have to be probably double blocked in order to be killed, which means that it will trade 2 for 1 and probably deal some extra damage. But opponent is not going to be able to ignore that thing, so it will frequently be 2 for 1. The problem with it is a rather clunky thing. It does have 5 toughness, so it will be okay by casting it. You have a blocker that should survive till the next turn, but this is more like a reserve option for your go white-red artifact deck. And I'm pretty sure that in some decks it's going to be relatively strong. I like the trample on it, and I like the fact that it can threaten this 2 for 1 big attack. In terms of enablers, there are several. First of all, there are 2 cards that gain an effect when they are tapped. One of them is the Volatile Wonder Glyph. That's 1 in a red 2/2 artifact creature golem. Whenever it becomes tapped, you rummage. So you discard a card, and if you do, you draw a card. I think that this thing is going to be quite good in those decks. Being able to Ramage at the end of their turn because you crew some random vehicle, and you can get card selection through that. It's going to be great. Tapping it to put counters on something while ramaging and getting better cards for your game is going to be great. So I'm looking forward to it. And at work, in its floor is a 2-mana 2/2 that attacks once and ramages, which is sort of reminiscent of Scrapwork Mutt. Hopefully you can use it twice, then it becomes really like a Scrapwork Mutt, which was a good card, and it even has 1 more toughness. So I'm looking forward to Volatile Wandergriff being like the go-to 2-drop for my red-white decks, and potentially also for my blue-red decks, which will be having some synergy with artifacts and maybe vehicles. Tinkerer's Tote, that's the card I'm super high on and super hopeful that it's going to be one of the best cards in the set. 2 and a white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens, and you can sacrifice it for a white mana and you gain 3 life. So weirdly reminiscent of a card that would make 2 1/1s and a food token. It's 3 pieces of cardboard for 1. Rectangle Theory at its finest. It's going to be great in those white-red decks because of how much cardboard it puts on the table. So yeah, definitely thumbs up for me in Tinkerer's Tote. Also, I would love to have a tote that can carry a gnome. That will be my friend. Unfortunately, only in my dreams. And the last card I picked here, it's representative of a whole category of cards, and by that I mean equipment. Equipment is great in the fact that once you equip it, you can tap it and you don't care about it because it doesn't change how it works at all. Diamond Pickaxe, on top of everything else, is generating treasure, which are going to be additional pieces of cardboard you can tap. And this is brilliant in this format that, Descent cares for permanent cards, but tapping doesn't. Tapping tokens is as good as tapping a 7/7 creature, probably even better. So Pickaxe being able to generate more pieces of cardboard and at the same time being tapped itself for those abilities is going to be a big game. Okay. Next, we have artifact synergies, and they are peppered around the set, but mainly in the Jeskai colors, and they're sometimes linked to pirates. So pirates doesn't have its own tribal, full-blown tribal kind of thing. It does have a couple of cards that care about them, but most of those cards also care about the artifacts. So pirates are sort of linked together with the artifact synergies. So that means that you probably want to play your pirates in your artifact decks, and you don't care that much about the pirates themselves. So one of the cards is Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider. I put my bet on it as the top win rate signpost uncommon. I think because it's going to be just really good in the decks it's put in, and it's going to be the make or break for those decks. If you draw your Captain Storm on turn 2, you're going to be very much advantaged. If you don't draw Captain Storm, you probably are not going to be super stoked to play that game. But of course, Jason ILTG, that was Magic Data Twitter account made this poll about which cards you think are going to have the highest win rates, and I picked Captain Storm because I know about win rates, and I'm assuming that Captain Storm is just going to have a disproportionately high game in hand win rate because it's going to be essential for the decks it's in. But it's a great card. It's a 2-drop, 2-mana 2/2, and whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. And importantly, it doesn't say other pirates, so it can draw itself, which is basically perfect. You play it on turn 2. Turn 3, you play 2 artifacts, or imagine playing Toads, and it becomes a 5/5. And you can swing with it, and then next turn it's going to grow even further. If you have other pirates, you can boost those and then ignore Captain Storm because it will be a sort of removal magnet. You can play around it and move Captain Storm out of the certain removals range and then put stuff on other things so that you, even if they kill it, value is going to be left on board. Absolutely brilliant. And the artifact synergies payoffs, they are going to be also focused around Jeskai. In this slide, I'm focusing more on the blue and white ones, but there are several red ones as well. Zoetic Glyph, 2 and a blue for an aura enchanted artifact. Enchanted Artifact is a golem creature with a base power and toughness 5/4 in addition to its other type, and when it's put into graveyard from the battlefield, you discover 3. So basically for 3 mana, you can make a 5/4, most of the time with haste, and even if they kill that 5/4, you get still to discover 3, which means you get some extra value. That card is just going to be amazing, and I really want to play it with the Diamond Pickaxe and have a 5/4 indestructible creature swinging on turn 3. That's going to be something that I really want to make in the set, and probably will achieve it because you just need 2 uncommons, which is not that difficult to assemble. Another card that I do like for those artifact synergies payoffs is Master's Guide Mural. It's a 3 white blue for an artifact. When it ETBs, you create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token, and you can craft it for 7 mana. You flip it on the other side, and on the other side you have an artifact that you can tap to make another 4/4. And you can only activate it on a turn where an artifact entered the battlefield under your control. It counts itself, so you automatically get a 4/4 as you flip it because it entered the battlefield again. But any other artifact later that you're going to cast is going to come with an additional 4/4 attached to it, which is great. Like, think about it. This is the kind of thing that Hilda had for tapping things in the last set. But unlike Hilda, the other side of the Master Guide's Mural is not killable by any removal, which is great, and it already left a bunch of those 4/4s, which is great. Even if they kill it, you're pretty much ahead. Also, I think it's the best art of the set. I absolutely love the mural art. I don't know who the person that drew it is, but it's amazing. I love it. I want to have it on my wall or something. And the last piece I decided to showcase is the Waylaying Pirates. That's a 3 and a blue for a 3/3, which is not a great stat line. It's a human pirate. When it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. This reminds me of Bergstrider, sort of a mini version of it with a 3/3 body, but I think it's going to be great in some type of decks, some kind of decks that are playing tempo. So the kind of decks that play turn 1, 1/1 flyer, turn 2, 2/2 or something, turn 3, a 2/2 flyer, and turn 4 they play Waylaying Pirates to make sure that they don't that opponent cannot race effectively. And if you chain a couple of those, you're just going to win this game by with your small flyers doing the damage. So I can see it as a decent card in both white blue skies, and I can see it as a great card in blue-red artifact decks. It's another pirate for Captain Storm to put counters on later in the game as well. So that's a pretty neat co-synergy with the pirates and artifacts in this deck. And there are a couple of other interesting payoffs. There is the 2-mana 2/1 creature that looks at the top 4 cards from your library, and you can get a pirate or an artifact into your hand from those cards. That's going to draw a card quite reliably if you build the deck right. I had it in my pre-release, and I played it 3 times, and I drew a card of it 2 times, and that was a sealed deck, which was not completely maxed out on synergies. I'm expecting that this card is going to probably draw a card like good 80% of the time when you, or maybe even more than 80% of the time when you have the right deck for it. So that's going to be great because 2-mana 2/1 that draws a card is an amazing rate for that. I think that this card is going to be also great. Right, we move to Craft, or as they call it in Germany, Hochland. No, anyone knows the melted cheese brands in Europe? Late value engine. Most of those cards are cheap on the front side and quite expensive to flip. It does have synergies with artifacts. It does have synergies with some amount of self-mill. It's focused on Azorius. There is 5 blue cards, 4 white cards, and 1 blue-white card, the mural that we talked about, in those colors. But it's present in all other colors. There's 2 black cards, 3 red cards, 2 green cards, and 2 colorless cards that have craft. As I said, it's a late value engine. For example, Clade-fired bricks. It's going to be Clade-fried bricks forever for me. Thank you, Cord. Clade-fired bricks is a 2-mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, you search for a plains. You put it in your hand and you shuffle, you gain 2 life. We've seen that effect before on like the Samurai, Cycling Samurai from Kamigawa. It makes sure that you don't miss your land drops, which is good, especially in best of 1. And then you craft it for 7 mana, you flip it, you make 2/1/1 gnomes, and basically an anthem effect that you can tap for your abilities as well, which is great. I mean, I played with the card in the pre-release. It was amazing. I also had Ochertak, so I made 6 2/2 gnomes instead of 2, but that's a different story. I think that this card is going to be excellent in those grindier decks, sort of making a weird impression of Imperial Oath. So yeah, I do like it. But all of the other craft cards look pretty decent. Here are some craft payoffs, let's call them. Inverted Iceberg, it's a 2 mana artifact. When it ETBs, you mill a card and then you draw a card. The mill, if you build your deck right, will most of the time fuel something in the graveyard that you can craft with later. This one has craft with artifact for 6 mana. You flip it into a 6/6, and that 6/6, whenever it attacks, you can untap or tap target permanent. So it basically has minimum, it has vigilance. At maximum, you can reuse some weird effects like for instance, Master Guide's Mural backside. If you untap it, you can tap it again to make another 4/4. Then one of my favorites of the format, Spring-Loaded Saw Blades, 1 and a white for a flash artifact. When it ETBs, it deals 5 damage to target tapped creature and opponent controls. And you can craft it for 4 mana with another artifact, and it flips into a 5/5 vehicle that has crew 1, so nothing really. Or you can actually crew it even when you don't have any creatures by tapping 2 untapped artifacts you control. This is brilliant. 2 mana to deal 5 to a tapped creature is great. The fact that it is flash is great because you can do it before that creature connects. It's going to be great in the defensive decks, but it's also going to be pretty decent in offensive decks because the 5/5 is big. And also, you can, for example, play it, kill something, play the pup that returns something to your hand when it ETBs, return it to your hand, and you have another use of that removal. So a great combination there. The fact that you can recycle it is pretty decent. Explode things, good point. You can also do it after the creature connects. And yeah, that's exactly what you can do. You can also kill a creature that never attacked you, but tapped for some other kind of effects. So remember, when you're tapping the 3/3 thing to put a counter on itself, that Spring-Loaded Saw Blades might appear out of nowhere. And the last one I picked is Ixalan Landmark. It's a 1 mana artifact, and when it ETBs, you scry 2. And I think that this is the more important part of this card. It's a great way of fixing your draws. And I think that in heavy white deck, you can sort of play it instead of the 17th land, and you can play it on 16 land, because that scry 2 is going to be basically drawing you a land next turn, so you should be fine with that. And then you can craft it with an artifact, and it becomes a 1/4 flying creature that when it attacks, it gives flying to another creature of yours. And this might be important in some decks. I can see that happening when you have the adaptive gem guard and you grow it. Sometimes the problem will be that this thing is just going to be killing a gnome every single turn because of lack of trample or anything on that. But if you can take it up to the sky with Ixalan Landmark's backside, then you will kill your opponent very quickly. And yeah, that's one of the uses of the card that I can imagine. I can also see it being playable in some other color combinations, like, I don't know, white-green that has large creatures, to make those large creatures flying, and use this as a way of breaking through any defenses. Okay, craft enablers. Well, first and foremost, we have Market Gnome. That's a 1 white mana for a 0/3. When it dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And when it's exiled from the battlefield, when you're activating a craft ability, you gain 1 life and you draw a card too. So you can either use it as a blocker, finally get it killed, and then you gain 1 life and draw a card. Or if you didn't manage to lose the gnome in any way, you can just exile it for a craft ability. You will also get to draw a card and gain 1 life. Weirdly enough, when you exile it from the battlefield in any other way, it doesn't draw your card. So make sure to remember about that. And when it dies, you can still craft it from your graveyard, but you won't draw a card second time. That will be too busted, probably. Still a very cute 1-mana creature. It's a 1-mana artifact. It's a 1-mana 0/3 for defensive decks. It enables your extra bonuses from crafting, which is great. Waterwind Scout, I put it as an enabler, but it represents the whole category of things that bring a free artifact with their ETB. Because most of the crafting is done with other artifacts, Waterwind Scout will produce the map token, and you can then use the map token to craft something from the battlefield when you didn't manage to get any artifacts in the graveyard. And sometimes it's going to be useful. I did several times already craft things with the map tokens I got from Scout or from the Siren, because I didn't have anything in my graveyard, and that was the problem that I was facing. And then there's Waterlogged Hulk. This one has a craft itself, but it's a 1-mana artifact that for a tap mills a card. And when you mill several times, eventually you will get fuel for crafting in your graveyard without having to sacrifice something on the battlefield, because that should be your priority. If you're crafting things, you want to make sure that you exile things from your graveyard, not from your battlefield, because you didn't have to pay mana to put something on your in your graveyard, and you did have to pay mana to put something on the battlefield. So obviously is important. Waterlogged Hulk in general looks to me like it's a card that is an enabler in a multitude of the archetypes. It remains to be seen if it's really good, but I'm pretty hopeful that this card is quite essential for many decks, and I want to have it in mind, at least in the first days. Right, we go to Descended. One of the varieties of the descending in the set. Descended, it usually says that at the beginning of your name the step here, if you descended this turn, do something. And here we have the Deep Goblin Skulltaker, 2/2 menace. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Deep Goblin Skulltaker. So if you play it right, it's going to be a 3-mana 3/3 with menace. It's decent, but most of the time it's going to be a 2/2 on curve. It's going to be a 2/2 creature with menace. Maybe will grow later. So all of those things will be something happens when your permanent card was put into your graveyard and on your turn most of the time. It's focused in red-black. There are 5 black cards, 3 red cards, and 2 red-black cards that do it. There's also 1 white card and 1 black-green card that have the Descended ability. The payoffs. And I put the payoffs in quotation mark. I think that most of them are relatively unimpressive. There is Enterprising Scallywag. 2 mana for a 2/2 Goblin Pirate. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a treasure token. This one actually looks like it might do something because probably you care to play it because it's a pirate and it's a 2/2 and it makes treasure, which means that probably you're going to most of the time try to play it in the blue-red rather than the red-black deck. Because the problem with the making of those treasures is that you can't use those treasures to descend later because treasures don't trigger the descent. It has to be a permanent card, and treasures are not cards. So you just make those treasures, and you cannot even use them later to trigger your descended payoffs, which I'm not super keen on. Then you have the Brood-Rage Mycoid. That's a 4-mana 4/3. Excellent stat line. It is a common. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a 1/1 black fungus creature token, so not a card again, with this creature can't block. So you can't sacrifice your tokens later to make descended. You're going to be happy if this is a 4-mana 4/3 that comes with a 1/1 that cannot block. This is not a great deal, to be fair, and I'm not super high on that card. Then you have the Signpost uncommon, Zoyova, Lava Tongue, black-red for a 2/2 Death Toucher. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyova Lava Tongue deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. This looks good until you realize that against some decks, you are going to help them to reach their goals. Because if you play against a Descent deck that actually cares about the number of things in their graveyard, in the late game, they will be happy to sacrifice that redundant land to fuel their Descent. They're going to be happy to discard this thing that is pretty meh because that will fuel their descent and make sure that they can reach this magic numbers of 4 and 8. So I am pretty low on it. I don't think that the 2/2 body is just good enough. Dealing 3 damage occasionally, opponent has a choice of what's happening. This is not what I want to be doing. This is not what I want to sacrificing my actual cards into my graveyard for. So generally, I'm low on the descended payoffs. I wrote a tweet about this, that this reminds me of an archetype that was built around having multiple Ichor Shades in it, and Ichor Shade was rubbish. These are slightly better because you can self-mill, but on the other hand, you don't have that much self-milling in black and red. Most of the mill things are in green and blue. So I don't know exactly how they are planning to make sure that I can trigger those descended creatures every single turn, because you have to do it every single turn. Yes, Ichor Shade was pure garbage, and that's why I'm surprised that there's a whole archetype built around multiple. There's like 3 Ichor Shades. The Deep Goblin Skull Taker, Broodrage Mycoid, when you squint, it sort of is Ichor Shade. Worst of all, that doesn't even grow itself and creates the not being able to block funguses. And then there is the red 3/3 that also can grow when you descend it, and that's equally unimpressive for me. Descend. This is sort of threshold, but only counts permanent cards in your graveyard. It comes in 3 flavors: Descent 4, Descent 8, and Fathomless Descent. Descent 4, of course, means that you need 4 permanents in your graveyard. Descent 8, 8 permanents in your graveyard. And Fathomless Descents just counts how many are there, and the effect is proportional to how many are there. It's clearly a Sultai mechanic. There's 7 black cards with it, 6 blue ones, 3 green ones, 3 blue-black cards, 2 black-green cards, and 1 colorless card with Descent. Here is an example: Akawoli, the Seething Tower, 1 black-green for a 3/3. But if you descended 4, it becomes a 5/5 with Trample instead. And when you descended 8, it becomes a 7/7 with Trample that can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, which is great. The problem is getting there. Descent 8 is quite a lot. So payoffs for that, depending on the numbers. Descent 4 payoffs, you have Echo of Dusk, that's a 2-mana 2/2. But when you have Descent 4, it gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. This reminds me of Snooping Newsy. Was it Swooping Newsy? I guess Snooping Newsy from Streets of New Capenna. That was a blue-black for a 2/2, and if you had 4 creatures, was it 4 types? No, was it 4 types? Oh, 4 different casting costs in your graveyard. It became a 3/3 lifelinker. Now this one is going to be way easier to do. Snooping Newsy was a good card, even though it was hard to enable. Oh, it was 5. Okay. It was much harder to enable than Echo of Dusk, and it had the same payoff. This is much easier, which makes me think that Echo of Dusk is going to be one of the better black commons. Looks great. 3/3 lifelinker is a solid body. It helps you to stay in the game. It blocks well. It attacks well. It wears things well as well. So yeah, I'm pretty high on that one. I think it's going to be a must-have card in anything that tries to descend as an early drop that later becomes relevant. Then we have Frilled Caveworm, 3 and a blue for a 2/5, my favorite stat line. But this one, if you descend 4, it becomes a 4/5 for 4 mana, which is good. It's a big body that blocks. It blocks well. It can later swing. Blue decks do like those 4/5 creatures to clog the board and make sure that they survive into super late game when they should excel. And we have things like Coati Scavenger, 2 and a green for a 3/2. But when you have a Descent 4, when it enters the battlefield, you can return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. And it's cute. It's absolutely cute. There is this Coati and it collects things, and I want to have it at home. But I guess that this card is going to be pretty decent for the long game self-milling decks that might want to rebuy some of the things in their graveyard once they hit the magic numbers that they needed. And then there are Descent 8 payoffs. Ushbenbach, The Great Mistake, 3 blue, black, Vigilance Menace, Skeleton Horror. It's a 6/4. And for 6 mana, for 4 blue, black, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter, but you can only activate it when there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard and only as a sorcery. So this card, obviously 5 mana, 6/4 Vigilance Menace is okay. It's not amazing. It's pretty good, especially in this color. It's like big. It's hard to block. It will probably trade 2 for 1, especially when you have some spells that can help it connect. But also, it's played in the color that wants to Descent 8. And if you want to Descent 8, I'm pretty sure you have to mill. And if you mill, then sometimes you will mill Ushbenbach, The Great Mistake, into your graveyard, and then you can recast it from there, which means that you draw it from milling, which is always a good thing to have in your mill decks, cards that you sort of draw for free just by milling them to your graveyard. So I think that this card is going to be solid in any kind of self-mill decks. Then we have the Watertight Gondola. That's a vehicle 4/4 with vigilance, and with Descent 8, it can't be blocked. So it becomes a 4-turn clock, which is great again for your. It's a great card for your late game deck that wants a finisher, because unblockability is great, and you can only kill it at instant speed, which is also great. And it only has crew 1, which you can hopefully afford by that stage. And by the way, this is the backside of the Waterlogged Hulk, the card that mills the card by tapping. So what I can imagine happening is that you play the Hulk on turn 1, and you start milling, and 8 turns later you can flip it, and all of a sudden you have your 4/4 unblockable. And another Descent 8 card, Starving Revenant. That's a rare, 4 mana, 2 and a 2 black for a 4/4. When it ETBs, you surveil 2, and then for each card you put on top of your library, you draw a card and you lose 3 life. Yes, it is a undead version of Sylvan Library that you can only hit once. But when you have a Descent 8, whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So for instance, if it enters the battlefield when you have Descent 8, you are going to lose only 4 life by drawing those 2 cards, and you're going to drain your opponent for 2. And every single time that you draw a card, you're going to drain for 1, which is hopefully going to recoup the life that you might have lost for drawing cards from the top. And of course, it's surveil, so you can choose to mill some cards rather than drawing them and not lose the life. Archaea MTG, I'm going to put it on YouTube tomorrow, so yeah, it's going to be there. Descent payoffs. Here are all the, well, not all of the, but some of the Fathomless Descent cards. And I picked 3 removal cards. One of them is a sort of quasi-removal, Song of Stupefaction. 1 and a blue for an aura, enchant a creature or vehicle, important. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 cards. So you self-mill, which is good. It fuels itself. And it has Fathomless Descent. Enchanted permanent gets -X/-0, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So hopefully in the good deck, it will start by milling 2 permanents, and it will give -2/-0. You can play it on some early creature, and then just like leave it on the battlefield and not care about it. Later in the game, you can actually make something that would attack you into something that will be a wall. So yeah. Then we have Terror Tide. That's 2 black for a sorcery. It has Fathomless Descent. All creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So sort of Wrath. But in order for it to be a Wrath, you need to play it in a dedicated deck, which is great because I like those Wraths that you have to work for. And, you know, sometimes when you are in the right position, you can play something big, cast the Wrath, and then one thing of yours will survive because you played well, utilized your synergies well, and you sweep the board of the opponent and kept your things because you managed how many cards you have in your graveyard. And lastly, we have Chupacabra's Echo. This is not the Ravenous Chupacabra. This is just a tribute. 2 black, 3/2 creature, Beast Horror Spirit. It has Fathomless Descent. When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. This card looks great. If you can play it early and kill a 2/2, you're super happy. If you can play it late and kill a 6/6, you are even more happy. Scales well with the game, is great. So you will be playing it, you will be picking it, and once you pick it, you want to be playing some sort of Descent kind of theme deck. Now, enablers, this is important. And we have the Waterlogged Hulk, as I mentioned. The 1 blue on that card is just an amazing value. Play it early, mill several cards, you don't care what they are, and you happily build up your Descent very quickly. And after some time, you craft it with an island that you milled, and you flip it into this 4/4 unblockable monstrosity. But I think that the most important card, because of its rarity for the enabling of Descent quickly, is going to be Deathcap Marionette. That's a 1 and a black fungus. It's a 1/1, and it does have Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 cards. Or you may mill 2 cards, which is great, because late in the game, when you don't want to mill anymore, you can skip that part. And it's great. Some of those cards in Streets of New Capenna that forced you to mill were just so annoying because you couldn't play them late in the game because you had too few cards in your library, and you had to sit with them in your hand, and it was frustrating. And I'm glad that they put the May on the mill thing right now, because it's a much better solution to it. Deathcap Marionette, I think it's a great card for this deck because, first of all, your problem is the early game, because you dedicate your early game to building up those Descent things. Lots of your cards are either not doing much or weaker than they will be later. You don't want to put them directly in combat, which makes you susceptible to early attacking. The Marionette can block and kill anything it blocks. It costs 2 mana. It also is good in the late game, because in the late game, it is going to be just threatening to block their biggest attacker. They have to really think about how to attack around it. It might be even a magnet for removal, which is a great for a 2 mana common thing that already gave you some value by milling stuff in your library. There is no X1 hate in this format, except for 1 spell that is probably unplayable, or should be at least unplayable. Probably going to learn that some of my opponents are going to play it. But I wouldn't worry that much about X1 hate, so they will have to use a real removal spell on the Marionette, which sounds great. And the last card, Oraska Puzzle Door, 1 mana thing. As you can see, I picked cheap things because I think that you should start enabling your Descent early, because you want your Echoes of Dusks to be 3/3s as quickly as physically possible. Oraska Puzzle Door is a 1 mana artifact, goes blue. 1 and tap, sacrifice it. Look at the top 2 cards in your library, put 1 of those cards in your hand and 1 of them into your graveyard. So it puts most likely 2 permanents into your graveyard, itself and whatever thing you decided to mill from the top 2 cards in your library. This again is an instant ability, so you can squeeze it in the place on your curve that you can afford it. Maybe you keep up a counterspell or something, and opponent didn't play anything, sacrifice Oraska Puzzle Box. Maybe you keep a removal just in case they do something weird. They don't, sacrifice Oraska Puzzle Door. Yeah, it has a lot of cross synergies, this card. It looks pretty solid, like not like busted solid, but a good gluey kind of piece for many decks. Yeah, White Fangs says a good point. You can also trigger your Descent at instant speed. So opponent attacks into your 2/2 Echo of Dusk. Boom, sacrifice Oraska Puzzle Door, mill another card. All of a sudden you have 4 permanents in your graveyard, and they are attacking into a 3/3 lifelinker instead. Okay, so these were the enablers. I'm going to talk a bit more about self-mill later, so don't you worry about it. We have explore and map now as a mechanic, and this is a loose theme around the set. Yes, there is a bunch of explore creatures. There is a bunch of creatures that make maps. but I don't think that the theme is very coherent because, first of all, the explore creatures and the map creatures are going to be good in any deck, which is already a problem because if the creatures are good in any deck, you cannot ensure that people are going to pass them to you. No one is going to pick Uchbenbach, the Great Mistake, unless they are really meaning to descend, because the card is just not going to be that great. Frilled Caveworm is pretty poor if you cannot reliably put the descent. Capybara, even worse. Coatly Scavenger is a terrible card if you don't descend. So these cards will be picked by a specific deck, which means that non-specific decks are going to stay away from those. Maybe not in the beginning, because people will probably think that it's too easy to get to descent. But at some stage when the format matures, I'm pretty sure that those guys are going to be way, way further in the priority of people that are not building around those synergies. But River Herald Scout is going to be good in any blue deck. It's a 2-mana 2/3 or a 2-mana 1/2 that drew you a land. These are great stats for a creature. Because that's what Explorer does. Explorer looks at, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it in your hand. If it's not a land, put a +1/+1 counter on the thing that it's explored. And then you can decide whether you're going to keep it on top or put it in the graveyard. But payoffs for the exploring are scarce. And for a good reason, probably. They thought, well, the mechanic is good on its own. Why should we give payoffs? Well, you should give payoffs for people to try and build around it, I would say. But they did not. There's very few of the payoffs, and we're going to go through probably all of them. It's focused in Simic. There's 9 green things that explore or make maps, and there's 7 blue things that explore or make maps. There is a minor spillover why is this thing there? It should disappear. There is a minor spillover to white and black. There's 2 white cards with Explorer maps and 2 black cards with Explorer maps. The enablers, we have creatures with Explorer. An example of it is Cenote Scout. It's a 1-mana 1/1 that explores. So amazing card. Either a 1-mana 2/2 or a 1-mana 1/1 that drew a land. Great. Then there is a card that I forgot the name of the front side, but in the back side, it's a Guidestone Compass. 1 and a tap, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. So it gives you this ability to explore every single turn. On the front side, it's a 2-mana artifact that taps a creature and puts 2 stun counters on it. And you can craft it for 3 mana to make it into the Guidestone Compass. And you have things that make maps, like Waterwind Scout, 2 and a blue, flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, create a map token. And the map token is basically an artifact that you can pay 1 and sacrifice at sorcery speed. And then target creature you control explore. It gives you a bit more flexibility. Wow, Scorcher, really, do you have to cough out furballs when I'm streaming? On my backpack, nonetheless. Ugh. And kicked out the door from his lair. Good part of it is you can target your creature that you want to pick. What I found really great in my pre-release, I had a bunch of those 1/1 flyers. Sacrificing a map token to target those. Great, because a 1/1 flyer, if it gets boosted to a 2/2 flyer, it's an amazing boost. And it speeds the clock by a significant chunk. If you have multiple of those things, you can quickly make like 3/3 flyers and you draw your lands and you smooth everything. It's great. But you see, I already am thinking about it as a white-blue mechanic when I have a lot of flyers and I make maps and I boost my flyers and I speed up my clock, rather than thinking about how I can squeeze those things into my green-blue explore-themed deck. Because there's not that many payoffs. The main payoff is the Nikanzil Current Conductor. Who knows what happened to the previous one? Green and blue for a 2/3, which is good stats. Don't get me wrong, it's good stats. Whenever you explore a land card, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So instead of drawing those lands, you can just put them directly. And, if you play this on turn 2 and then you explore on turn 3, you will frequently ramp yourself, and that's great. But in the late game, it's not that great because you will be able to play that land from your hand anyway, untapped. So you will very often choose not to do that. But the other part, whenever a creature you control explores a non-land card, this thing grows. It gets a +1/+1 counter. So it will probably become like a, a 3, 4, 4, 5, which is good for a 2-drop. But that's the real only good payoff for Explore. What the other cards that we have is the Merfolk Cave Diver. That's a 3-mana 2/4, which is an okay body, don't get me wrong. And when it explores, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. So if you play it, if you clog the board and nothing else happens, if you explore 7 times, you will kill your opponent. Or maybe if you do it twice a turn for 5 turns, you can kill your opponent, because it will get, I guess, an additional +1/+0 for every time that you explore it during your turn. It's not terrible. As I said, 3-mana 2/4 is a good defensive body, and the fact that it has utility later is okay. But it's not like something that I would say, "Ooh, Merfolk Cave Diver, let's explore. I'm in the business." It is an uncommon. If this was a common, maybe you could think about building around Explore. But at an uncommon, you can hope to get 1, maybe 2 of those. So you will not have them like guaranteed. And yeah. Explore like caves is mostly about uncommons. Yes, I think so. And then you have Twists and Turns. That's a 1-mana enchantment. It costs green. If a creature you control would explore, instead you scry 1 and then you explore. So basically you can have a preview. If you don't like what you're seeing, like if you want to counter and you see a land, you can scry the land to the bottom. If you need a land and you see a spell, scry it to the bottom. Otherwise, you can just do whatever is there. And when a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more land, you flip it into a land, and that land is a sort of Search of Azcanta, but for creatures and artifacts, which is not really the theme of green, which makes it a bit weird. So, yeah. Strange card. I guess the fact that it costs green is going to make it playable in some kind of a heavy explore deck. But you will probably need to have like 8, 9 things that explore. Maybe some of those things that can explore every turn, like the Guidestone Compass, for example. Okay. Next thing, more power. That's how I called it. It's a very minor theme. It looks like it's been added to give white-green any kind of identity. So they just said, right, white-green doesn't do anything. What do we put on it? Oh, let's put the whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deals combat damage to something ability. They put it on 2 cards. 2 cards. And this is something that Mark Rosewater said, that in every set, not every color pair is fully supported. There will be maybe 6 color pairs that are strongly supported and 4 that will be more loosely supported. And I guess green-white in Lost Caverns of Ixalan is one of those loosely supported themes. So it's not realistically a build around. When you open Sovereign Okinek Ahau, 2 green-white for a 3/4 with ward 2. Whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than this creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. You will probably build around that Sovereign Okinek Ahau. And then hopefully you're going to also get Kutsil Malamet Exemplar, which is going to work. If you are drafting a white aggro deck and you get late Kutsil, you might actually move into that archetype. And there are ways of making creatures having more power. It's just that there are no payoffs for it. And here are a couple of the things that I highlighted. Malamet Warscribe, 3 white for a cat warrior. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. So every creature you control that can attack will have greater power than their base power on that turn. So curving Sovereign Okinek Ahau into Malamet Warscribe is probably game over, because everything that you already is +2/+1 bigger, then you attack with them, they become +2/+2 permanently bigger. That should end the game most of the time. Apart from that, the card that I'm actually quite hopeful in this set, for different reasons than being a great enabler in green-white, is Might of the Ancestors. That's 2 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains vigilance until end of turn. It doesn't look much, but when you think about it, it's like a bone splitter that you never have to equip ever again. It doesn't work on defense. You want to put it in a deck that is focusing on attacking. It gives you an additional plus of the vigilance, which sometimes will be useful. And I see it as a decent card in Sky's deck, because that helps me racing more efficiently. And if I play 3 flyers, if they kill 1, I'm still happy with the other ones getting the bonus. I am going to test that card. I think some people gave it an F. I don't think it's an F. I think the card is decent. I played against it in the pre-release, and it was super annoying when opponents started putting it the +2/+0 on their 3/2 flyers, and they were swinging for 5. And it didn't feel like very much fun, especially that they had like 5 or so flyers, and they could bleed me quite efficiently with those cards. And then you have a bunch of cards that get +1/+1 counters on themselves. Example I put here is the Pathfinding Axejaw, 3 and a green for a 4/3 dinosaur. When it enters the battlefield, it explores. If it explores successfully, it's going to be a 5/4, so naturally will become a higher power than its base power. There is the 2 mana 1/2 that puts a counter on something. There is also the good 2 mana +3/+3 and trample trick, which is going to be great with all those synergies. So yeah, all those cards do exist and will enable more power enablers. Also, any equipment that you can have in white especially is going to increase the power of those creatures. Again, it's a loose theme. You're probably going to have one deck that you open Sovereign Okinek Ahau and then in the format, and then the rest is probably not very important. Oh yeah, the new Ozolith. Yeah, there's the new Ozolith that puts counters on creatures. That's also going to be great in that. I just think that, white-green is going to play out as an aggro deck with some combat tricks. And if you happen to have Kutsil, or if you happen to have Sovereign Okinek Ahau, you are going to be super happy. But you don't need those things. Just play normal aggro and live your life. It might actually be a good deck just by strength of white alone, plus adding some chonkers from green, plus being awkward by not having all those other synergies that people are going to be prepared for in sideboards or whatnot. It might be just one of those kind of, how do they call, fun police kind of decks, when you just play a solid aggro, when you have a good curve from 1 drops, because there's a couple of 1 mana white flyers, then good 2 drops because white has couple at least of good 2 drops, and then green can provide solid 3 drops, solid 4 drops, and top end of the curve as well, and then good combat tricks from green as well. So let's see, but it will be a straightforward deck. Okay, dinosaurs. It's the only kindred that doesn't say tribal at all here. The only kindred fully supported. It cares about dinosaurs, shockingly. It's a Gruul theme. There are 10 green, 9 red, 2 red, green, and white, 1 white, red, green dinosaur. They have a splash through other colors, some spillover, mainly through land cyclers. There's 2 black dinosaurs, 2 blue dinosaurs, and 1 white dinosaur. This archetype comes with some problems. First of all, low count on common level. And it's uncommon biased archetype. You will really need to have some good uncommons for the archetype. And also, a bunch of creatures in this archetype are high mana value. So, for example, at common, you have 1 3-drop dino, and maybe like 2 4-drops, and then you have like 5-drop and like 4 6-drops and 7 drops or something. So there is like a bunch of very expensive spells, and you're playing aggro. You somehow have to think, how do I get those early drops? And they are going to be absolutely essential for this deck. Some notable dinos. I picked the cheap ones because they are going to be the thing that you need to highly prioritize. You really will need to get out of the way to get those armored kin colors in your deck, because this is your only 3-drop that you're going to get at common. Armored Kincaller, 2 and a green, 3/3. When it ETBs, you may reveal a dinosaur from your hand, or if you control the dinosaur, you gain 3 life. So solid if you have dinosaurs. And again, it's premium because there is not many of 3-drops in the dinosaur tribal title that you're going to have. Then you have Itzquint, firstborn of Gishat, red and a green. Bard class, anyone? Red and a green, 2/3 haste. When it ETBs, you may pay 2 mana. When you do, target dinosaur you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. This card is amazing. It's absolutely broken. If it deals 2 damage for 4 mana, it's already great. If it deals 5 damage for 4 mana, it's even better. So yeah, 2 mana, 2/3 haste is already good. So yeah, I mean it's a very obviously good card. And then you have Belligerent Yearling, 1 and a red for a 3/2 Trampler, which is already good. It's a dinosaur. Whenever another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Belligerent Yearling's base power become equal to that creature's power until end of turn. So it will sometimes all of a sudden become like a 6/2 or a 7/2 with Trample that will slam through some damage, and you're still going to be left with its bigger fellow dinosaur for laters, even though it's going to be probably an attack that will result in Yearling going to the graveyard. It should still push through some damage, because who is going to risk that you're going to do the same play pattern next turn and swing for 5 again? So these are the notable dinos that I selected, mainly based on the cost. There are some dinosaur enablers / payoffs. Notably, Ixalan's Lorekeeper, green for a 1/1, tap to add 1 of any color, spent only to cast dinosaur spells or activate an ability of a dinosaur source. Very important if you want to play this deck, because this is your way to actually be able to speed up your mana curve. You play this on turn 1, you play something on turn 2. On turn 3, you can play a 4-drop dinosaur, which are already there. So hopefully you can jump through one hoop. This card is probably going to have a pretty high opening hand win rate in the dinosaur dedicated deck. But you need to be really heavy on the dinosaurs, because it doesn't do anything if you don't have dinosaurs to cast. So you probably need, 12 dinosaurs to play it. There is another one that is a 2 mana 2/2 that taps for mana of any color. And with this one, you can exile dinosaurs from any graveyard. And then if you exile the dinosaur from your own graveyard, you can actually cast it from exile with the finality counter. That's going to be also a good enabler, because it helps you to ramp from 2 to 4. And then in the late game, it will allow you to recast your dead dinosaurs. It is a rare, yeah. It does produce mana for cycling dinosaurs, this one. Lorekeeper you will be able to use this mana to cycle your dinosaurs. That's like a neat bonus that it has. Thank you very much for reminding me of that, Omnath Nudes. Then we have Triumphant Chomp, red for a sorcery, deals damage to a target creature equal to 2, or the greatest power among dinosaurs you control, whichever is greater. So great shock for red, but if you have dinosaurs, it can deal up to 7, up to 12 damage if you play Galta for some reason. But normally it's going to be more frequently like 4, which is good, maybe 5, which is great for 1 mana at sorcery speed. I'm super happy to play that. And you have Burning Sun Cavalry. This is the answer of the design team to the lack of low mana value dinosaurs in the format. They made a 2 mana 2/2, 1 and a red for a human knight. Whenever it attacks or blocks while you control a dinosaur, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it's a sort of like early drop that is not a dinosaur, but will be bigger if you do have dinosaurs. So I don't know how to treat this creature. All I can hope is that if you're playing dinosaurs, you should get those relatively late, because who else is going to be interested in Burning Sun Cavalry apart from the dinosaur player? I mean, otherwise it's just a vanilla 2/2, which is not a card that you should be playing in Modern Magic. Okay, the last synergy that we have is caves, and I'm going to take a longer time to talk about caves. It is a subtype of lands, and it will have some specific payoffs built for them. There's 13 lands that have a cave type, and there are 5 flip cards that on the backside turn into cave lands. So that's how many of them you have. And I did some preliminary stats because we don't know exactly what the frequencies of cards are, but if they are as I expect them to be, 2.4 of each common, 0.9 of uncommon, and 0.34 of rares, we're going to have around 17 caves at common per pod, and then around 6.5 caves at uncommon per pod. So you're gonna get, and a couple of rare ones. So we're going to have roughly 25 caves per pod. So this means that my estimate is if cave deck is going to be a cave deck, you probably want to have around 10, 12. You will need to draft half of the caves that are open in your pod. But okay. If that is a possibility, because they are not going to be heavily contested, which I think in many of the cases is going to be the situation, because most of them are unplayable unless you really try to play around it. Then if you're the only drafter of caves in the pod, you might get enough caves in order to make a deck. Now, we're going to spend some time theory crafting, and if you follow my Twitter, I wrote a thread about it, and this is going to be a big recap of that. But there are cave payoffs, and realistically, there are 4 main ones of them. There's Bat Colony, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. This is important because you will need white mana from a cave somehow in order to get the full value and make 3 1/1 bats. If you make 3 1/1 bats for this card, it's great value. Whenever cave enters the battlefield after it's been already on the battlefield, the colony, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So you can put it on your bats, for example. Next one is Calamitous Caven. It's 3 and a red for a sorcery. It deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker, Quintorius, namely, in limited format here, where X is the number of caves you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard. So you see, Bat Colony only cares about the caves that you have on the battlefield. Caven, any cave in the graveyard also counts for it. Then you have Sinuous Bentisor, 5 and a blue for a dinosaur. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of caves you control, plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard. Put 2 of those cards in your hand, and the rest at the bottom of your library in any order. So if you have 2 caves, you're going to draw 2 cards. If you have 1 cave, you're going to draw 1 card. If you have 3 caves in your battlefield or in graveyard, you're going to look at the top 3 and pick 2 of those and draw them. And the more caves, the more anything. If you don't have any caves, it's just a vanilla for 6 mana. So this hopefully will be something that only a caves player is going to pick. And then you have a Gargantuan Leech, 7 and a black for a 5/5 lifelinker, but it costs 1 less to cast for each cave you control and each cave card in your graveyard. And I think that the important part is that those 3 care not only about the caves in the battlefield, but also caves in the graveyard. And that is a big game changer for how you build your cave deck. Bat Colony requires you to have caves on the battlefield. Also, Bat Colony doesn't combo very well with Calamitous Caven, because if you cast Bat Colony into Calamitous Caven, you kill your bats. So you will need to sequence it very well in order to get the value. And that's what makes me think that these 3 are actually the most important payoffs for the cave deck, even though on paper I think Bat Colony looks like the strongest one of the 4. Because I think that the cave deck is going to be a self-mill deck, because it's easier to mill your caves into the graveyard for the payoffs than to count on drawing all of them. Even if you have 10 caves, you will still draw, maybe 5 of them, 4 of them in the game. If you mill quite a lot, you have access to many more of them. Then you have green payoffs, couple of them. One of them is Castlem's Stone Tree, 2 and a green for an artifact. When it ETBs, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped. put the rest on the bottom at random order, you actually have 2% chance roughly to miss on this thing. Remember that. It will be very annoying if it happens. But it has craft with a cave for 5 and a green, and you can flip it into a 5/5 vanilla creature. So, not a great card in my opinion, but it is a cave payoff. Then you have Spelunking, 2 and a green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave this way, you gain 4 life. So hopefully it will ramp you, and hopefully you will gain 4 life to pay off for at least, part of the life you're going to lose by tapping out for do nothing spell on your turn. And then lands you control enter the battlefield untapped. So any cave, and lots of them will come into play tapped. Any cave you play later is going to come untapped, which is going to give you quite a tempo boost later, because you already hopefully ramped to 4 lands. You drew that extra card. Next turn you can play an untapped cave, and you have 5 mana to do with whatever you want. And then you have a rare payoff, sort of. It's a Cosmic Confluence, 4 and a green for a sorcery. You choose 3, and you may choose the same mode more than once. And the modes are search your library for a cave, put it into the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, or if you have Spelunking, untap. Then you can put 3+1/+1 counters on the cave you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. Or you can destroy target enchantment. And I think with this card, a frequent pattern will be, I'm going to find 1 cave, put it on the battlefield, and make a 6/6, or maybe I can make 2 hasty 3/3s if it's late in the game, or if it's not so early, I can make like a hasty 9/9. This set doesn't have that much removal, so a 9/9 might actually do the job. So that will be exactly Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi, but it has more into it. It has modality that Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi did not have. So you can make a 6/6 and a 3/3, or 6/6 and find a cave from your library, put it into battlefield for some kind of effect. Or you can sometimes find a good enchantment target to destroy. Scorcha, yes, I love it that you are interested in annoying me, but now is not the time. Yes. I'm being viciously attacked by a cat. He's biting my finger. Now he's licking it. And in a second, it's going to bite it again. Yes, it's biting it again. There you go. Live stream of me being attacked by a cat. So yeah, I think Cosmic Confluence is quite a decent card for the caves. So yeah, as I said before, I think that these 3 are the main payoffs that you should be looking at, especially Calamitous Caven, because it lets you play this control game when early game doesn't matter, because you reset the board reliably if you have a couple of those. They don't care if the caves are on the battlefield in the graveyard, so drawing into many caves is unlikely, even if you have many of them. So I think it's the best way to mill them. And in order to mill them, you need specific mill cards. And Deathcap Marionette, again, is a very important card for this archetype, like it was, in my opinion, for the Descent decks, because it's a 1/1 Death Touch for 2 mana, and it mills 2 cards, and clogs the board, because no one wants to attack in a 1/1 Death Toucher. There is no X1 housing in the set, and the milling 2 will hopefully put a cave into graveyard or something. Waterlogged Hulk, again, tap to mill. Hopefully by turn 4, it milled at least 1 cave. If you have 10 of them in your deck, statistically it will mill 1 cave in your graveyard over that time. And later will become a threat that is unblockable, which is also a good way of winning games. Symphon 50, yeah, Red Tectonic card houses X1s, but I'm hoping no one will play it because it's rubbish. And if they play it, so be it. I'm playing someone that plays Tectonic Hazard, and I'm happy about it. Sage of Days, 2 and a blue for a human wizard 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of the library and put the rest of them in your graveyard. So have some selection. You can specifically put the caves in your graveyard and have them there for other payoffs that you need. And put on top whatever you need. Like maybe you can dig deeper for your Caven or Bentisor or Gargantuan Leech. Once you are a mill deck, you're naturally a descent deck. And I think that if you're building a cave deck, you're also building lots of the descent things. Like you want to play your Echoes of Dusks. You want to play your 2/5s that turn into a 4/5s. So all the decent synergies are also great in the cave deck that I'm envisioning here. And you also want cards that are good if they are milled. And here specifically, Buried Treasure, I think, will be a great card in this particular deck because you are playing a multicolor amalgam that will play a lot of caves that don't give you the mana of colors that you need. So in this deck, even sometimes casting Buried Treasure is good. But of course, best option for it is getting it milled and then later in the game using the 5 discover option to find your other spells. Ich bin back, the Great Mistake, is good because you can mill it and then cast it from your graveyard without drawing it. So you got a free draw from your milling. Another card that I think is pretty decent is Self-Reflection. Allows you to flash it back for 4 mana, and you create a token that is a copy of target creature you control. So, for example, good targets for it are going to be either the Dinosaur or Gargantuan Leech somewhere later in the game. And if you mill it, you sort of get a free discount on that card, because for 6 mana it's not great, but for 4 mana it's actually pretty good. And there are a couple of other things that you're going to be happy milling in the set. So look around for those cards if you are playing a self-mill deck or a cave deck that is based on self-milling. And then if you mill, you might as well reanimate, because you're going to put some big things into your graveyard. And you also might want to play the Land Cyclers, because you play many caves, but you also need colors to cast your spells, which caves don't always provide or will provide for damage, for example. So Land Cyclers will help you find the colors that you need and fill in your graveyard. And then there are several reanimation spells that you can use to bring back your Nurturing Bristleback. And I'm talking about cards like Soulcall Viper, like Defossilize, which also will let you dig for your caves, which is neat because it explores twice your creature that you're going to return with it. And because you're milling a lot, maybe even Squirming Emergence is a card that you might be willing to play. That's the 1 black-green for a sorcery. It has Fathomless Descent. Return to the battlefield target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So if you did a lot of self-milling, you can actually think about bringing a Nurturing Bristleback for 3 mana, which is not a bad deal. Or you can go for something like Gargantuan Leech. And in the worst case scenario, you just bring back your Deathcap Marionette, mill 2 more, and hope you get more caves in your graveyard and getting all those synergies from that. Then you have some cards that will help you find the specific caves. So some of them will have Enter the Battlefield effect. There is one that exiles cards from opponent's graveyard that might be useful to have and to find later in the game. You have cards like Compass Gnome. That's a 2 mana 2/1 that when it ETBs, you may search your library for a basic land card and or a cave card and reveal it and then put it on top of your library. This thing is also pretty good with any Explorer creatures you might have in your deck, and you are playing both blue and green most likely if you're playing the Descent synergies, so you might have some of those. Because you put it on top of the library. If you explore in the same turn, you're going to draw that card and you're guaranteed to draw, and you can select when you do it. Then you have Scampering Surveyor. That's 4 mana for 3/2. When it ETBs, you can search your library for a basic land card or a cave and put it into the battlefield tapped. Again, you can find those important caves that you might be interested in putting on the battlefield instantly. Glimpse the Core is another thing that you might use because you mill, you are going to get your caves in the graveyard, and Glimpse the Core allows you to either put a basic forest card on the battlefield tapped for 2 mana, but you can also return a cave from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, which means that you ramp yourself using the graveyard caves. You can do it because you milled them, or you can do it because you sacrifice them for some effect, and have it for reuse, and sort of ramp your mana through that. So that's a card that probably few people are going to be interested in, that you might have access to, and it might actually be decent in your deck. Okay, and I think that this is sort of like a longer version of how I would build around the caves. I have no idea if that build around is going to be good. I've seen some cave decks in the early access that did well. They did have 8-10 caves in them. And I think that this is the first requirement that you need to fulfill to make it. But hopefully, a bunch of those caves are absolute rubbish unless you play the caves deck. Which makes me think that hopefully you will be able to get to 10 caves most of the time when you're the only cave drafter in the pod. And hopefully those cave payoffs are also going to go slightly late. I'm not saying that they're all going to wheel every single time, but you might get them like in the first pack at pick 5, 6, or 7, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to try this time to build this cave deck, and hopefully my suggestions are going to be at least somewhat useful for you in that aspect. Right, I have a couple of cute build arounds to talk about at the end of the stream. First one I want to showcase is Ocher Ashonil, Deepest Might. That's a 2-red god. It's a 4/4 with trample, and it has a text: if red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than its power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to its power instead. And I would like to... This card is okay. It's a 4/4 with trample for 4 mana that dies into a land. But if you have Sunshot Militia, it can be a very quick clock, because I see the pattern of you playing Ocher Ashonil and having Sunshot Militia on board already, and then you tap like 4 permanents, and every time you activate Sunshot Militia, instead of dealing 1 damage, you deal 4 damage. So you activate it a couple of times, you deal 8 damage. You untap, you activate it a couple of more times, you deal another 8 damage. That should end the game. And that's a cute build around that should be relatively easy to assemble, because Militia is going to be easily accessible, in the first week, as Kato Kakato says in the chat. So that's a cool thing to look for when you draft Ocher Ashonil. There are a couple of other things. There is a Dino that taps for 2 damage, for example. But of course, it's not as powerful as the Sunshot Militia. Or should I call it one-shot Militia if you have Ocher Ashonil on the battlefield. Another build around, I think, is a Turbo Guardian of the Great Door. I showcased it earlier in the stream as a white-red card, but I think that the true power of that card will come in blue-white, because that's the only way that you can play it on turn 3 in this format. And that would require you playing Spyglass Siren on turn 1 as well. So you cast Spyglass Siren, you make a map, you play a 2-drop, and on turn 3, if you have 2 white mana, you will always be able to cast the Guardian of the Great Door. Which I guess in this kind of scenario, the most tricky part of it is going to have 2 white mana. And I think this can be a basis of a really good, aggressive Flyers deck. So that's how I would see it. Playing Spyglass Siren, playing the other things that make map, and flying the 2/2 flyer that makes map for 3 mana. Playing maybe the 2-drop that puts counters on things, because then you can make your 1-drop flyer a 2/2 very quickly. There's a bunch of other 1/1 flyers in the set, so anything that boosts them is great. This is the kind of a card where I can see the enchantment that gives +2/+0 until end of turn to a target creature you control every turn is going to shine, because you will have a bunch of flyers, and to speed up your clock, you can play this thing. And then, you have white removal that not so many people are going to be interested in Cosmium Blast, for example. Obviously, the Soul Blades are going to be also great in this thing, because you're attacking on a different level than your opponent. You're attacking in the air, they are attacking on the ground. In those kind of decks, the kill an attacker removal becomes good. All those tempo spells, the bounce spell that returns something and makes a map if that target was tapped, is going to be also great in this deck. Maybe even the 5 mana counter spell. When you build up a board and they will need to play something big to stabilize, you can counter it for 5 mana and discover to seal the deal. That's going to be maybe good even. But I can see this tempo deck being decent, because there are so many 1-drop flying evasive creatures and so many ways of making them 2/2s very quickly. So yeah, I would And I would see Guardian of the Great Door as a key piece for that deck, because churning it out on turn 3 is going to make a very fast clock. And I did it in the pre-release, and that game didn't take long. I already had like a bunch of flyers. I played this, and then I started swinging for 7 in the air. And even without any kind of tempo removal, my opponent couldn't raise that. I played like a 1-2 that puts a counter on one of my flyers, and that chumped something, and then the race was swung in my favor so badly that the opponent had to concede. Also, another card that is great in this deck is the 3-2 flyer that makes a 1-1, because the 1-1 is going to chump something big and preserve your life while you're dealing damage in the air. And 3 power in the air is pretty decent. Right. Cute build-arounds. I played against a double Abuelo deck in the pre-release. Someone was lucky enough to open 2 of those, and you can make some fun things with it. There are a bunch of artifacts with ETBs that you can blink. One of them is Master Guide's Mural. You can flick it every turn to make a 4/4, which is great. And you don't have to craft it to flip it. There is a Runaway Boulder, which if you can flick that reliably, well, that thing will kill everything slowly but reliably. And I think Runaway Boulder, it's not going to be a great card, but it's going to be a card that you're going to be playing some amount of the time. 6 mana for a flash artifact that deals 6 to any target. You can get this removal in colors that normally don't get access to it. Cycling means that it's not completely dead in your opening hand. You can just cycle it to get some other card, and then it's in the graveyard ready to be crafted with something. I think it's going to be playable. And there's a bunch of other things that have ETB's effect. You can exile your toads to make gnomes another time. You can do a bunch of things, and Abuelo is going to be good. And the card is just great. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer with Ward 2, which makes it annoying to kill. With pride, I have to say that during the pre-release, I bravely cast Petrify on it without the mana to pay for Ward. And I learned for the rest of the format, yes, it's Ward 2, not Ward 1. It's the other thing that has Ward 1. Ward 2 is a great way of protecting itself. Okay, another build around that I find that is not only cute but also can be effective is the Ancient One. The Ancient One is a 2 mana creature. It costs blue and a black, and it's an 8/8. Alas, it can't block or attack unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, which is a problem. But it does have an ability: 2 blue/black, draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value. And we have Land Cyclers. And Land Cyclers all cost roughly 6 mana, maybe even 7. So if you play it on turn 2, play something else on turn 3, maybe the Marionette to make sure that opponent is disincentivized from attacking. And on turn 4, you activate the ability of it, draw a card, and you discard a Nurturing Bristleback or a 6 mana black Land Cycler and target yourself, and you mill 6 more cards. There's a good chance that you already have activated your Descent 8 on turn 4. And then on turn 4, you have a hasty 8/8 creature. That's going to end the game very quickly. And while you're playing this build around and you mill a lot, you might as well, and you want to mill big things that have a high casting cost, you might as well play Defossilize. So you can bring back your Nurturing Bristleback even if they deal with the Ancient One. Or even bring back the Ancient One because you already have Descent 8 and you're happy to use it. And in some games, if you're playing it in a control shell and it can't attack through something that you cannot kill, you can just start double activating it and milling your opponent out and finishing the game by reducing their library to 0. So I think Ancient One, it looks like it's a non-playable card, but I think that it is going to be actually pretty decent if you build the deck around it. And 2 mana 8/8, great. Okay, another build around is the artifact build around, and I already mentioned Captain Storm, but there are a couple of cards that are going to be cute enablers for it. And one of them that I'm really looking forward playing, I had it in my white-blue deck where it was nothing synergistic really. It was just a solid rate artifact. But I think in the Captain Storm Cosmium Raider deck, Careening Minecart is going to be great. You can curve it out. You play Captain Storm. You play Careening Minecart, make a Captain Storm into a 3/3 and swing with it. And then next turn you can play random artifact creature, grow Captain Storm, use that other creature to crew the minecart, swing with it, make a treasure, another trigger from Captain Storm. It very quickly goes completely out of proportion if they cannot deal with Captain Storm. Yeah, this deck will also love Sunshot Militia. And another card that I wanted to showcase in this artifact build around is Poetic Ingenuity. That's 2 and a red enchantment. And it has a tricky text that may be misinterpreted by some. It says whenever one or more dinosaurs you control attack, create that many treasure tokens. And that may convince some people that it's a dinosaur build around. But I think that what it is an artifact build around because of the second part, which says whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 3/1 dinosaur creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now, it won't trigger on making treasures from the Careening Minecart, but if you're playing the Captain Storm deck, you already will have a lot of artifacts, so that thing will trigger a couple of times and make 3/1 dinosaur every single time, and then those dinosaurs attacking will make more treasures, which will trigger Captain Storm more times, and that's the moment when you want to also be playing. There is the 1/2 flying vigilance artifact pirate siren that taps for mana for artifacts, which ramps you, but also becomes a target for Captain Storm and is an artifact for all the others. And this comes together as a very synergistic kind of ability. I like that it's confusing because that's where people that consume content gain their edges, and I love giving edges to people that consume content. So there you go. If all cards were obvious, the game would be boring because it would not require skill and knowledge gathering. All right, that's the end of my build arounds. I didn't find as interesting ones as in the last set, as I said, but there are some that I'm going to be super keen on building around. I think that this set has interesting pockets of synergy from theory crafting perspective. Obviously, it's going to be sad because there's probably going to be like a bastard red-white deck, and it's going to be so good that all the synergies are going to be meaningless. But I'm still hoping to do some interesting things on the first days of the format. I already had the pleasure of being invited to the early access and played a bit with it. But unfortunately, all the drafts that I had, I didn't get anything super interesting. Last draft that I did, there was a white-blue kind of combo artifact aggro tempo. But I didn't get to play a single game with it. So I'm looking forward for those first days to test new things. But until then, I hope that you're going to use some of the ideas I gave to you. I hope that what I was talking about was useful in any way. Hopefully next week we're going to have the first episodes when you're going to look at the early data and see how my predictions worked. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them didn't work because some of them I don't think are valid for the early format, but they might come in relevant in 2-3 weeks time when the format stabilizes and people know better that some cards should not be drafted unless you're in a particular color combination or something. Okay, but with that, I would like to thank 17 Lands team, who are as always amazing and are working very hard to make sure that the new set is working smooth. They have, I think, a better rate of things working smoothly on the launch day than the arena development team. So that's something to cheer about. So thanks to Viral Misnomer especially and Ale Baldini, who's, I'm sure, elbows deep in making sure that discovery counts. And also thanks to Fake Jake Brown, my guardian angel, who helps me with releasing the podcast. Give some love to Fake Jake Brown. If you are a content creator yourself and you're looking for a person that will be good in managing what you're doing and giving you good advice and helping you with editing, paying Fake Jake Brown. I know that some limited podcasts are already hiring him to do their stuff. I would highly recommend it. Work with Fake Jake Brown is an absolute pleasure. He's a lovely person. One of the few people that are more crazy than I am, which is a compliment. So give him a little love and jobs, because the more jobs he gets, the more he can contribute to the community, which will make him happy. And while we're on my podcast, I would also like to thank Asescu and Mana Junkie for the music I'm using as the intro. And I would like to thank my patrons, especially Kambu, who is a new one. And if I can interest you in supporting me on the Patreon, please do so if you can afford it. It would be awesome. It makes me motivated, and it amortizes some of the cost that I lose in time on preparing those episodes. And of course, thanks to mtgazone.com, and a reminder to you that if you still are hungry for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan content, I wrote a guide to removal, which is a good addendum to the topic of the seminar. And with that, I'll see you next week.